Hi guys, so today I'm coming to you with another ship breakdown for Star Wars Armada, and today we're talking about the CR-90. Now this was probably the first ship you ever saw in Star Wars, also probably the first ship you ever saw in the game because it comes with the core set, or one of the first three ships you ever saw because it was also in Wave 1 as its own standalone expansion, but I'm going to start out by saying this is probably the best ship in the game, hands down, as far as point cost and what you get for the points, as far as efficiency, and best bang for your buck. My personal favorite ship, and maybe I think it's even a little broken at how good it is. So the CR-90 comes in two versions. The CR-90, or otherwise known as Corellian Corvette, comes in two versions: the CR-90 Corvette A and the CR-90 Corvette B. Now the A comes in at 44 points, the B comes in at only 39 points, and the big difference between these two is the red dice. The A has two red in the front and then one red everywhere else around, and the B swaps those out for blue dice. They each have one command, one squadron, and two engineering. And they have two evades, which is pretty interesting, and a redirect. They only have 4 hull, so they're very squishy. But these things can go up to speed 4. They have a ton of maneuverability. They have 2 shields all around, except one in the back, and a couple of interesting upgrade slots that we're going to talk about as we get farther forward. I'm going to talk about the different titles that come with the CR-90, and we're also going to talk about some of the some possible loadouts for it. We're going to talk about its roles and where it fits into the game today, and which commanders will work best with a fleet designed for CR-90s, or at least one CR-90. So I want to talk about the titles. There are 3 titles for the CR-90s. The first is the Tantive 4. Now, I said Tantive. I am aware it is actually pronounced Tantivy as per the radio dramas, the audiobooks, and the official Lucasfilm canon, but I don't say Tantivy, except for the purposes of explaining why I say Tantive. Because I'm not alivy, I'm alive. When I'm active, I'm not activy, I'm active. So it's just, I don't know, I'm a human, so I say Tantive. So the Tantive 4, it costs 3. It's kind of, it kind of does the job of some stuff that's already in game now, but it was like one of the first ways to basically pass tokens, and it's not, I don't see it used as much. It's kind of the support function for a Corvette. It kind of does what CommsNet does on a Rebel transport. But one thing that's interesting about it is it's whenever you receive a token, so it could be potentially comboed with other things. Like, for example, you could combo it with a CommsNet and be able to double that distance, which is a possible use if you wanted to put your commander on a Rebel transport and keep it really far away from the battle, but still have its CommsNet work. You could have its CommsNet pass the token to the Tantive, and then have the Tantive then pass that same token to another ship. So you could double the range of a CommsNet. So that's kind of interesting. It could also work well with Leia too if you really wanted to make it into a support ship. It also make it thematic because that was the ship we saw Princess Leia on at the beginning of Episode 4, or at the end of Rogue One. Dodonna's Pride is the next title. Now this is a very good title. It's costs 6 though, so it's a little expensive. Now it is a blue crit effect title that deals a face-up damage. And it cancels all the other dice though, so you're not going to be able to get to do all of your dice. But the beautiful thing about these critical effects is you decide them after your defender has spent tokens. So if they just assume you're going to trigger the Dodonna's Pride effect and don't spend any redirects or anything like that, then you can say, okay, I'm not going to trigger that effect, and we'll just let all the dice stand and deal you all this damage. So it puts the ball in your court as far as where you want to, how you want to trigger the effect. So that makes it very nice. It gives you choices, and choices are usually very good. It's definitely strongest on a CR-90B, and it's also worth mentioning that in modern times, we have Sato out there, and Sato could potentially get you to roll blue dice at long range if you put it on a CR-90A. You have those red dice at long range. If you put Dodonna's Pride on a CR-90A, which nobody would have done before we had Sato, now you could potentially roll 2 blue dice at long range and trigger that effect at long range. So that's a possibility. That's something you can do. Now, because it's Dodonna's Pride, if you're running Dodonna as your commander, don't put Dodonna on the Dodonna's Pride, especially if you're running it as a B, which if Dodonna's your commander, you probably would have it on as a B. because this is a ship that's going to get close with any CR-90B. You're going to want it to have to get a little bit close because it's going to have to be in blue dice range. And when you put yourself in blue dice range of other ships, you stand a very good chance of not living very long. So I've run Dodonna's Pride several times, and I never put my commander on it. And when I'm running with Dodonna, who actually is a great commander for Dodonna's Pride, people always say, how come you don't have Dodonna on Dodonna's Pride? And I'm like, because this is a ship that's designed to die. It's designed to get up close and personal with you and probably not survive. So definitely don't put Dodonna on Dodonna's Pride. The next title is Jaina's Light. Jaina's Light only costs 2. Now here's a ship that is amazing. It lets you ignore the effects of overlapping obstacles, and it also makes it to where your attacks cannot be obstructed. So this is a super survivability title, and it's great to put your commander on if you're going to have your commander on a CR-90, because it allows you to stay in the rear behind other ships in relative safety and still be able to shoot through your other ships as if you weren't obstructed. It also works great for objectives. It works great because there are certain objectives that require you to land on an obstacle, or maybe something like minefields and the obstacles are in your way, or even in the campaign, if you get like asteroids and there's even more asteroids on the map, you can ignore the effects of overlapping them, and you're gonna need to overlap obstacles eventually. It just happens. So here's a great ship for you to be able to do that with, and it's just a great ship for you to, or it's a great title to put on a CR-90A, specifically because of the obstruction issue. You're going to probably want this behind your other ships or in a place where you're as far away as possible, but you still want all those red dice to hit. Especially on your sides where you only have one, it really stinks to have an obstructed shot and you lose your 1 red dice and have no shot, even if you had something like Akbar, or a concentrate fire. You would still lose the shot because you lost that first die. You still have to have a die there after you remove dice to then be able to, add extra dice. So those are our titles. I want to talk about the CR-90B and A when they're specific configurations. But before we get into that, just let's talk about some of the other things that are common between both of them. So they each have a support team, and for a support team, the only option I can really see putting in here and that I would recommend is engine techs. There are other support teams out there. I don't think any of them really complement the CR-90 very much, and I'm certainly not going to cover every possible option. But engine techs allows you to ram, and the CR-90 is a very good ramming ship. At least until we get the Hammerhead. We're all assuming that whenever the Hammerhead comes out, it's going to be a ship that's good to ram. But CR-90 is a great ramming ship, and with engine techs, it can ram twice. And you combine that with someone like General Riken and a whole bunch of CR-90Bs, then you can have a whole bunch of ships ram. I don't ever suggest you doing this outside of maybe once, just like trying it out, because it is cheesy and it's not really playing the game. I don't mind if you want to have like maybe one ship that's designed to be ramming, but if you build your whole fleet to ram, you're probably not going to be invited back to play wherever it is you're playing. So again, you test it out with a friend maybe one time or something like that, but don't go into a new place or don't walk into like a tournament and with a fleet full of ramming ships and expect to be welcomed with open arms, because that's just not in the spirit of the game. But it's just cheesy. It's cheesy. I've gone up against it once. It was not fun, and so you want the game to be fun because this is a very fun game. So Engine Techs is probably the best support team out there. They have a defensive retrofit, and I'll be honest, I never put anything in defensive retrofit. I mean, the whole point of these guys is to make them cheap, and most of the defensive retrofit stuff goes for, really works for ships that have more hull or more better defensive tokens. Like ECM is good, but I would never put it on a CR-90A because I don't have that brace that I really need. And the Evade is probably the best thing the CR-90 has, and you have 2 of them, so you really don't need ECM there, and it really increases the cost. If you do want to put a defensive retrofit, I would definitely suggest maybe cluster bombs. I said definitely and maybe in the same sentence. Cluster bombs is definitely a possibility, because this would actually work, especially if you had a couple of CR-90s and you had cluster bombs on all of them. It would really give you some solid squadron defense, because you're gonna roll probably at least 3 damage with a cluster bomb. So maybe any named TIE fighter that takes a shot at you is going to die, because it's not an attack, so they can't even scatter or brace any of that stuff. So that's pretty interesting. It makes somebody think twice before they attack you. That's for sure. So maybe cluster bombs, but I think you still need some squadron support, so you couldn't go without any squadrons and just count on cluster bombs. But I could see running cluster bombs maybe on some CR-90s if you had no other squadron support. Now officers, I do use officers that have basically, depending on the role you're planning on going with this ship, I've got two suggestions for different roles. So if you're going offensive, my number one is Intel Officer. Intel Officer is fantastic, and he really allows you to not worry about if you have an accuracy or not. And it really makes the sting, Intel Officer for me really beefs up if you're using several CR-90s and you're kind of going with the death by 1,000 cuts, it's just great, especially if you're running an A with turbo laser reroute circuits. You're going to have 2 or 3 damage coming in from each attack, most likely, and in each one of them, they're going to really be tempted to just suck it up and take. So that's good. Ramus Antilles is another option for an officer. He gives you, if you do concentrate fire as your command, he's also going to give you the token, so you get your rerolls in there. You get some dice mitigation with Ramus Antilles, but he's unique, so you can only have one of him. But he's an option, and especially if you're just, because the CR-90 is great for just having, like, I've got like 50 points left, what can I add on my list? And 50 points isn't enough to put a whole lot of other stuff, and you can put a decked out CR-90 in there, and you can put upgrades on the CR-90 as well, so Ramus could give you one solid ship out of that. For defensive options, Lando is a good option to put on any ship that is vulnerable, because he can easily save that ship's life, especially if you're not going to be first player and you need to get a ship in close in the front arc of that Star Destroyer. Maybe a CR-90B with Dodonna's Pride, and it's stuck, and it has to fly in there to try to get that shot. Lando can hopefully allow you to survive. Major Durlin is another option, and again, these are both unique. But Major Durlin could protect you from that maybe that long range shot that was just enough damage to kill you. Plus, if you're going up against other CR-90s, he can save you 1 damage per turn and hopefully slow the death by 1,000 cuts. And then for support, Leia, we've already talked about Leia's a decent option for support, or possibly Ahsoka. I haven't really used Ahsoka yet, but I can see her fitting on there. She's cheap enough too, so that she wouldn't really increase the cost of a CR-90, being a cheap ship. Now we're going to talk about the A first for the CR-90A, which is my favorite way to run it because I really like red dice. The obvious choice, you've probably heard about it, is turbo laser reroute circuits. People can make a CR-90A with TRC, and they call it a TRC-90. That's kind of the slang term for it. It allows just one upgrade. This actually fits well into the campaign if you're playing the Corellian conflict, because when you start out, you can only have one upgrade on each of your ships for the first battle, and a CR-90A with a turbo laser reroute circuit is amazing. And this is one of the reasons I think it's the best ship in the game, because every one of those red dice that it rolls, it can turn into a double hit, or a crit if you need the crit. Especially if somebody has brace available and you roll 2 red dice and you have a blank and a double hit. Well, I don't want to make the other double hit another double hit, because they're going to brace it to 2 either way. So then maybe I turn it into a crit. So they brace it, it's still going to be 2, but now they have the critical effect. So, it gives you choices, and you can just decide what you want to do. And and it's still cheap. That's only 51 points if you put it on an A. So that's amazing. But there are some other options. There's several. I'm not going to talk about every turbo laser option, but I also think enhanced armament is a possibility. Enhanced armament, if you're maybe running an Akbar fleet, I can see doing that, although TRC also works with an Akbar fleet. But if you want to maximize your side arcs, I can see maybe enhanced armament. And there are other options that if you want to go cheaper or more specific, maybe you just want to go front arc heavy. But I definitely think because the CR-90 has 2 evades, the turbo laser reroute circuit is kind of a must-have for the CR-90A. And if you disagree with me, if you run it a different way, I'd love to hear about it. But I think TRC is the clear winner for all CR-90As. For the CR-90B, they have the ion cannon slot, and there's several ion cannons. Some of them work better than others. I'm going to talk about 3 in particular. There's the SW7s, which turn your unspent accuracies or your unspent blue accuracies into damage. So this works better with the B because you've got all blue dice. And what this guarantees is that you're going to have at least 2 damage out of your side arc and at least 3 damage out of your front arc. If you do concentrate fire, then add 1 more to that. But it means every die you roll is going to be a damage. I mean, you have the option to spend an accuracy if you need to, but you can't possibly roll, you know, oh, I got a front arc shot on you with concentrate fire, so 4 blue dice, and you roll 4 accuracies and have no damage. So you can never have that happen. So with so SW7s give you guaranteed damage, and that's really good. And it's actually really good, I think, if you're trying to do a ramming ship, because you know you're going to be in range. You're going to be very, very close. You may even have somebody in double arc if you're trying to ram. So that gives you a lot of in-their-face damage, and it can combo well with Riken as well. So SW7s is a good option. Next up is the NK7. It's a expensive upgrade, but it allows you to discard a defense token from a defender. So this is really interesting because, you know, discarding a defense token is huge, especially if you get this off early game. Now you can only do it once per shot because you have to exhaust it, but it's pretty nasty to force somebody to lose a defense token. And because it is a a critical effect, you could potentially opt not to do it at all because it's gonna play mind games with them because they're like, oh well, I might as well use my only brace now because I'm gonna have to discard it anyway. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. I'll just give you a face up, and then maybe they just wasted their last token because they thought they were going to lose it anyway. So NK7 it gives you some options, but it's kind of expensive. So, that's kind of a pick your poison. Maybe you want to do that, but maybe the ship gets blown up before you get a chance to really do it. I don't know. I think if you're running any CR-90B, you probably want to have Torin Farr in your fleet. Not on the ship itself because she doesn't work for herself, but you want to be able to re-roll dice because if you don't roll that blue crit, it's really a pain in the butt. Next up is Overload Pulse. Overload Pulse is really nice for being your first attack to go ahead and get all their defense tokens spent or exhausted rather, and all your follow-up attacks after that are going to be great. When the game first came out, a lot of people thought Overload Pulse was kind of overpowered because they thought it worked before your damage was, or before they could spend tokens. But like I said, before the critical effects happen, after they've spent defense tokens, then you choose if you want to go with the default crit or some other crit. Overload Pulse doesn't stop them from spending the tokens on this attack, but it does kind of set up all your other stuff. So Overload Pulse works great if it's your first attack, especially if you're first player. So that's, because then you can fly this B. You can take your CR-90B as your last ship, fly it up close, put it in harm's way, and know that you're going to activate that first on the next turn. So those are the basically the differences between the CR-90A and the CR-90B, and they kind of impact the roles that they are going to perform a little bit. So roles that the CR-90 can perform. First off, I think its most prominent role in this game is as a flanker, and both ships can perform the role, but the A does it much better. And the idea is to have them fly around the enemy ship, around enemy ships, outmaneuvering them, because CR-90s have some of the best maneuverability in the game. They have probably the best maneuverability in the game. They're fantastic, and they're very very able to get in and out of different places and to dodge arcs. So they're just great at being able to take shots at the side arc or get behind another ship and take shots on the rear. So they're really good as flankers. The B isn't as good but it does still have the maneuverability, but it has to get closer. So the A works better as a flanker because it can stay at long range and basically rely on its evades to be even more effective. It can work as a support ship. It can definitely work as a support ship if you're using the Tantive 4 title or Leia, and there's other support ways for it, support options for it. And it's not the best support ship, but it can be a solid support ship, and it can definitely function as a swarm. And that's mostly because of the cost, but it can function very well as a swarm ship. And there's 2 different ways that I've seen it run as a swarm. I've seen a whole bunch of CR-90Bs ramming with engine techs, which is very cheesy. But I've also seen a couple of CR-90As, each with turbolaser reroute circuits. And that can be a very a very potent swarm, a death by 1,000 cuts, but they're not so small cuts anymore. It's like more like death by 1,000 large knife gashes. So that's rough, and especially I've run 3 CR-90As with turbo laser reroute circuits, each with Intel officer before. And that's really that's even stronger because you get the TRC and the Intel combined, and it's nasty because now you can, even if you roll an accuracy, you can turn that into the double hit because you don't even need the accuracies as much. But 3 isn't exactly a swarm, but it wasn't just the 3, it was other stuff as well. So they were swarmish, but it can definitely function as in a small flight group or as just a mass of ships because they're so cheap. And those are some of the roles that it can perform. It's definitely not tanky, and it's doesn't do any fancy tricks though. But we're going to talk about the commanders next, and I'm going to talk about which commanders work best. This is mostly my opinion. I'm going to start at the bottom of the list, which is least effective, but this is designed specifically if you want some commanders that are going to emphasize the CR-90. So granted, while I may say this particular commander is bad, it doesn't mean it's bad in general. It just means it's bad as far as specifically how it impacts the CR-90. So at the bottom of the list is Garm Bel Iblis. Now, Garm is kind of weak right now, and the CR-90 has a command value of 1, so Garm can only give the CR-90 1 token, and first turn they can take whatever token they want anyway. So Garm really does nothing for the CR-90, and that's why he's at the bottom of the list. I'm sorry to all you Garm Bel Iblis lovers out there. I wish he was a little better. Hopefully he'll get better soon, but Garm just isn't that good for the CR-90. He could be great for a fleet that has a CR-90 in it, but he doesn't really do anything for the CR-90. Next is Maydeen. Maydeen is a great commander. He doesn't do as much for the CR-90 because the CR-90 is so maneuverable. He can do great things for the CR-90. I just think he works better for everyone else. And I don't mean this as a bash on Maydeen because I've seen him do very good things with the CR-90. I just think that this is a ship that probably needed his help the least, and therefore he ranks lower on this list. He is still good, but a lot of these commanders I'm going to list after, from this point forward are all very, very close, and a lot of it is, this was a difficult list to make because it's a great ship and it can work with just about everything. So next up is Akbar. Now, Akbar is a little lower because the CR-90, has kind of weaker side arcs. The CR-90A only has 1 red die. The CR-90B has no red dice on the sides, so it's really hard for that to use Akbar at all. The CR-90A can potentially have 2 red dice, but it's not the strongest ship for Akbar. It certainly works, and I've used it before because you can basically turn that 1 die attack into a 3 die attack, and that's almost the same as having double arcs. You can, as long as you have a side arc, you can almost ensure you're going to roll 3 dice, whether you do a front and side or you just Akbar and just do a side. So it certainly works. It's just not the best ship for it. The strength that it does have, though, is that you can fit a lot of ships in there, so you can Akbar with all of them, but it is also possible to get just that same amount of dice anyway if you were to use your get double arc on your ships. So Akbar doesn't give the CR-90 something it couldn't get on its own if flown properly. I mean, some of that boils down into luck. I'm not saying if you only have 1 arc, I'm not saying you're a bad pilot, but Akbar doesn't do as much for the CR-90A, although it still does work. Next, Aaron Kraken. So General Kraken is actually decent for the CR-90A. He's just not super. He's still pretty decent, and I like him. He's kind of in the middle of the list, and again, a lot of these guys are really close. So this was a tough list to make. But the CR-90A is the fastest ship and the best maneuverable ship. So and you only have to be 3 or higher, so they can alternate between 3 and 4 and still get his benefit the whole time. The obstruction is going to help, especially if you're I think he relies on you flying these ships very, very well, and keeping them at long range. So hopefully you get as few dice as possible. Like the bad scenario here is that you're going up against Star Destroyers. Okay, so a Star Destroyer, let's say an ISD-2 has you at long range, and it's got 4 dice, and Kraken's going to reduce that down to 3, and then you have your evade, so you'll be able to cancel one of them anyway. So worst case, you only have 2 dice coming at you now. Now all of a sudden these CR-90s are pretty hard to hit, but you have to fly them all that well. Hopefully then you get them around the side arc, so he's got only 2 dice coming at you. It's obstructed, so he can only roll 1 red die, and then maybe he's got concentrate fire, rolls 1 more. There's maybe a double hit in there, and you cancel that with your evade. So Kraken can really help your ship stay alive, but you have to fly them good, so it's not all around the best. Next up, General Raiken. General Raiken is on here because he is amazing if you're going with a ramming or swarm type build. The more ships you have, the better Raiken becomes. The more vulnerable you are, the more Raiken can completely save you. So Raiken can keep all these ships alive long enough for you to ram. Like a CR-90 that would have been blown up at the start of this turn can now potentially activate, shoot twice, ram, engine techs, ram again, and then stay in place for then when that other ship activates, it's stuck ramming the CR-90. So it can cause a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, well, probably 8 damage. Potentially 9 if there's some token passing going on, but I mean, and then you can get that for all of your ships. That's best case scenario for a CR-90B. Potentially even more with an A if you roll double double damage reds. But Raiken can potentially add up to a lot of damage if you have several CR-90s. But if you're only rolling with a couple of like maybe 3 or 4 ships, then he's not as useful. He's better with 5 or more ships, in my opinion. Sato is next. Sato is starting to see a lot of love in a lot of my local play, at least, and specifically for the CR-90A. Because you've got 2 red dice in the front, and his ability can affect 2 dice. Generally, you want for a Sato, you want somebody to have at least 2 red, so they can get the benefits, basically to roll black dice at long range. And then if you concentrate fire, you can roll up to 3 black dice at long range. So that's really cool. It's as well as potentially to roll, like we talked about earlier, if you want to roll blue dice at long range by using a blue title like Dodonna's Pride. Sato has, it scares people. He plays mind games with your opponent because you get one, X-Wing or an A-Wing or even a Z-95 at range 1 of one of their ships. Now they're really thinking about doing anti-squadron fire when they could have just ignored that ship. So, it's not just about the dice you're rolling, it's also about the mind games you're playing on your opponent. Now, you may not rank Sato as high for the CR-90A. Like I said, a lot of these were close, but lately, and so I do reserve the right to say this is my opinion. He's up a little higher on the list, but it's only because I've had a lot of fun with him lately, and I think he's universal enough for any ships that have red dice. He might be higher if the CR-90B wasn't restricted to blue dice, because he really only works well with the CR-90A. And there we are. So next up, we're in the top 2. Dodonna is next. Dodonna is my all-time favorite, and he's amazing. And he works really well with both versions. For the B, he works well if you have Dodonna's Pride on your B. He also works well with the B in general because it has so many crits. It's very likely to roll a crit. He also works really well with the A if you're running TRCs because you can force that crit through there. And and the other reason I think he works so well with this is because you can fit so many and you have so many more crits. You can potentially filter almost all the way through your opponent's damage deck looking for all the best crits to put on them. If if you've got 6, 7 ships and they're all getting double arc shots and you're getting a crit through every time, it's nuts. And of course, Dodonna just works amazing even with objectives. Somebody lands on an asteroid, done. Minefields, somebody hits a mine, Dodonna. So, and the last thing is that this is a cheap ship and Dodonna is a cheap commander, and so it just kind of fits into, I want to have, as many spare points for upgrades and adding more ships as I can. These two kind of work really well for that. And my number 1 commander for the CR-90 is Mon Mothma. Mon Mothma is so very, very good. She is, and this was a tough one because I love Dodonna, but I had to give Mon Mothma the top slot here because of the double evade on this ship. Even if you're not running TRCs, and actually, especially if you're not running TRCs, this is going to help this ship survive. And if you, even if you are, you know, she's just, basically you can always use it. It turns, if you ever had to get into close range with a CR-90, you know that basically you have no defense tokens now, because you will still have a redirect, but you probably already used it by now, and that's why you're in close range on maybe a suicide run. But if you ever end up at close range, Mon Mothma gives you 3 defense tokens as opposed to having 1 or even none. Mon Mothma's just great, and even at the medium range, and she really shines for the CR-90B, because now you can get into medium range and try to stay at medium range and still be able to cancel a die. It's amazing. And I talked about Sato before. Sato is really seeing a lot of play. If you ever face a Sato, Mon Mothma's crucial for that too, because the evade is a huge tool that wasn't always as useful, but is becoming so much more useful now because of Sato and the ability now to be throwing black dice at long range. And black dice have a high chance of rolling hit crit. So being able to, maximize those evade tokens are just huge right now. So that's why Mon Mothma has the #1 spot. And this has been the CR-90 ship breakdown, guys. Let me know what you think. Did I miss something? Do you think do you think that I didn't cover a certain build for the CR-90 that you think should have been covered? I know there's a lot of options out there, and I can't cover every permutation of builds, but this is a little bit my opinion and a little bit of advice, and certainly please try not to just build ramming swarms. Us Armada players hate that. So you can try it once or twice, but just don't keep doing it, guys. But thank you so much for watching, and I really appreciate all the likes and comments. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, because you'll get all the latest videos. And if you want to click the little bell on the video to get alerts, and if you want to be notified whenever I post something new, you can do that to stay in the loop so you don't miss anything. So thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day.